The earthquake that triggered the devastating Asian tsunami of 2004 released the energy of about 23,000 Hiroshima-type atomic bombs. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed, and millions were made homeless, making it perhaps the most destructive tsunami in history. But ironically, the terrible numbers of people who had their homes destroyed and who were forced to flee because of this natural disaster are only a fraction of the much greater number of Asians who, much less dramatically, may also be on the move. In a flow of environmental-induced migration, which may be one of the most profound impacts of climate change.
But what is true is that based on history, if you look back at trends, Asia and the Pacific by far suffer the most deaths and the most economic damage of natural disasters of any other region in the world, by far. And so looking at those trends, if we expect that climate change will exacerbate the problems that we're already seeing, then we can expect that the Asian Pacific will continue to be hit very hard in terms of mortality and economic damage from climate change impacts.
One of the big shifts is that governments and international organizations are no longer just talking about natural disaster refugees, people who are forced to flee an earthquake, a landslide, or a typhoon. Although these are the tragic faces that we see on the news, the much bigger and more disturbing group are the people that we don't see, who are having to move from their traditional homes and are what some experts are calling climate change migrants.
But what we see here is that climate change and a whole bunch of environmental change processes are contributing to migration and displacement today, and it's a serious problem.
Climate change migrants move because of a variety of reasons. They think they can earn a better living working in a factory in the city. They go to join a brother, husband, or village friends. But although there may have been other pull factors making them migrate, one of the key push reasons is that they all believe that changes in climate, too little rain or too much rain, making crop growing more unpredictable, has made it harder for them to make a living, to raise their children at home.
In actual fact, even if climate change is only a catalyst, but not the main reason for people to move, it needs to be looked at very carefully. And your point, it's a good point in terms of the need to bring climate change into a holistic view of migration. It's important not to look at climate change and migration in its own little box. It needs to be looked at in the overall issue of migration in Asia and the Pacific. It's important to look at climate change as part of a comprehensive look at migration.
Climate change skeptics argue that it's hard to prove absolutely if the environment really has got worse, since the data that scientists rely on is open to different interpretations. And some critics also point out that there isn't just reliable, really long-term data. That ice caps melting or more typhoons may just be short-term events, and insignificant compared with the billions of years that our Earth has existed. So farmers and other people who rely on the land and sea to make a living might not be really having such a bad time, or it may only be temporary. But other researchers point out that in the case of climate change and migration, it perhaps doesn't really matter if there's been a recorded lasting change in climate. So long as migrants believe that it's got harder to make a home and earn a living because of tougher climate conditions, the issue has played a real part in their decision to uproot and move. The big question then becomes exactly how many people are going to become climate change migrants. Some studies put the global number at 50 million, while others say as many as 250 million over the next few decades. That would be like Indonesia's entire population on the move. But what is agreed by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or commonly called the IPCC, that there is a problem and that it can only get bigger.
The media often asks us, how many environmentally induced migrants are there worldwide? How many are we going to have in the future? Maybe I can just make a couple of comments. The IPCC noted all the way back in the early 1990s that migration in the future will probably be one of the most profound impacts of climate change. And since that time, we have really been trying to get our head around the numbers.
What talking about numbers does is I think, is it sensationalizes the issue. We don't want to sensationalize climate change and migration right now. What we would like to do is to raise awareness, to tell people that this is an issue, an important issue. It's not an issue to panic about, but it's an issue to care about and give priority to.
What international organizations like the Asian Development Bank argue is that just because we can't predict exactly how many people will have to move because of changes to climate, that doesn't mean we should be paralyzed into doing nothing. Statistics need to be gathered to track how many people are moving, but also who is moving and where they're going to. And countries that are handling enormous shifts of people, like in China and India, where millions are still migrating from the countryside to the big cities, might have some valuable lessons to teach in the journeys that are definitely going to come in the future.